Let me tell you 3 stories about the first days of the Russian invasion in Ukraine. Story number 1. On 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Missiles detonated in cities all over the country. More than 100,000 Russian soldiers with tanks and armored vehicles crossed the border, starting the largest war on European soil since World War II. A few hours before the Russian tanks began rolling into Ukraine, alarms went off inside Microsoft's Threat Intelligence Center. Microsoft had detected a new malware aimed at Ukraine's government ministries and financial institutions. This Viper malware, software developed to erase all data on infected machines, was called FoxBlade. Microsoft quickly worked with the Ukrainian government and authorities, providing technical advice on how to fight back the cyber attack. And within 3 hours of the discovery, ways to defend against the malware had been developed. Story number 2. On the same day, 24th of February, while the invasion was ongoing, members of the Ukrainian government met with representatives of Amazon Web Services. The discussion was about bringing Amazon Snowball devices, suitcase-sized data storage units in shock-proof gray containers, into Ukraine to help secure, store, and transfer data to the cloud, so that the destruction of hardware and of servers based inside of Ukraine would not destroy the data. They sketched out a list of the most essential data on the Ukrainian state, so population registry, land and property ownership records, tax payment records, bank records, education registries, and more. 2 days later, the first set of snowballs arrived in Ukraine via Poland, and over the next weeks and months, these snowball devices would become the foundation for the effort to preserve Ukrainian data. Ukraine's largest bank, serving 40% of the Ukrainian population, moved all of its operation into Amazon's cloud. Data from the country's land registry followed, and by December 2022, over 10 petabytes of data had been moved to the cloud. That's several times the data in the US Library of Congress. Story number 3. While Microsoft had helped thwart the FoxBlade malware attack, on 24th of February, another cyber attack disrupted broadband satellite internet access throughout Ukraine. Modems that communicated with Viasat, so the US company Viasat's satellite network, went offline. The attack actually had significant spillover effect, with thousands of wind turbines in Germany being offline, but most importantly, internet access to tens of thousands of people in Ukraine was cut off. And when it became clear in the days that followed that internet connectivity was disrupted for longer, Mikhailo Fedorov, the Ukrainian vice prime minister, tweeted at Elon Musk. Elon Musk, while you try to colonize Mars, Russia tries to occupy Ukraine. While your rockets successfully land from space, Russian rockets attack Ukrainian civil people. We ask you to provide Ukraine with Starlink stations. Starlink stations are, of course, internet terminals that connect to the thousands of satellites that Elon Musk's firm SpaceX has put into low Earth orbit over the last few years. And only a few hours later, at 11:33 on the same day, Elon Musk answered again via tweet, Starlink services is now active in Ukraine. More terminals en route. Over 30,000 Starlink terminals were delivered to Ukraine in the first 15 months of the war, providing secure communications to the military as well as the government and the public. Starlink has become the backbone of Ukrainian military communications. Ukrainian forces use it to live stream drone feeds, correct artillery fire, and communicate internally. Microsoft, Amazon, SpaceX. I just told you 3 stories about the first days of this war and the weeks and months that follows. The players and indeed the heroes of these stories are not state, not governments. They are companies. Companies which are providing goods and services that are vitally important to Ukraine's survival and to its war-fighting efforts. None of them are military companies. This isn't about Raytheon selling missile defense to the Ukrainian government. These are companies that primarily or even exclusively produce for the civilian market. Also, none of them are founded in or headquartered in the countries that are actually fighting this war, so neither Russia or Ukraine. And yet, they and other private civilian companies are playing a crucial role in this war. Companies go to war, the shift in power between the private sector and the state, that's the title that I gave my talk. And my theory, my working hypothesis, so to speak, is that we are witnessing a fundamental change in the balance of power between the state and the private sector. And this is linked to technology and to war, the 2 topics I work on. The examples I gave you, and I'm going to give you a few more, are coming from Ukraine, because that is the war that is currently taking place, and because it was while researching the use of new technologies in war, in that war, that I began to really think about today's topic. But the change that I describe is, I believe, more fundamental and goes beyond this specific war. So these are all quotes from Ukrainian soldiers or officials. I'd say the effectiveness of our work without blank would drop something like 60% or more. Fighting without blank services at the front line is like fighting without a gun. According to Fedorov, blank basically helped Ukraine survive as a state. Now, what are they talking about? Not Leopard 2 tanks, not HIMARS, not Patriot missiles. They're talking about Starlink, and they're talking about cloud services. And I didn't find a quote on it, but Google also helped Ukraine a lot, basically putting a cyber umbrella over many Ukrainian websites so that they couldn't be hit by denial of services attacks. And this is not just a story about software, about the cyber realm, about what's up there in the cloud, about the internet, about all these areas that seem a bit, removed from fighting. Companies are not just providing the cloud, they're also providing what is in the clouds. Because if you have followed the war in Ukraine at all, and I know that you all have, you know about the crucial role that drones are playing in this war. But which drones are dominating the war? Where are they coming from? It's not the Reaper drone built by US military contractor General Atomics. Ukraine doesn't actually have any of those. It's also not the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 drone, an armed drone which Ukraine did get at the beginning of the war, or used at the beginning of the war, and which played an important role in fighting back, for example, the convoy of Kiev. But if there is indeed an iconic weapon of this fight, it's this one. It's the DJI Mavic 3 drone. And if you think to yourself, well, that one kind of looks familiar, it's because it is. You have seen it in parks around your neighborhood. Maybe you have one yourself. I mean, I have a few, not DJI drones, but a few drones myself. You can buy them on Amazon or elsewhere. In this case, for a few $1,000s, there are systems that are much cheaper than that. Hundreds of thousands of DJI drones are flying in the skies over Ukraine. Both sides, importantly, Ukraine and Russia, use them. And just to be very clear, it's not just this one model, and increasingly we're talking first-person view drones that are becoming important, but the point is the same. These drones are being used for surveillance, to verify that your own troops are hidden correctly, they're modified to drop bombs or become a weapon themselves. But DJI drones, as you can see, aren't originally weapons or even military equipment at all. They're consumer goods, based by DJI Technology, a Chinese company based in Shenzhen. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, the war in Ukraine is still very much also about tanks and artillery, and the weapons deliveries from the US, from Germany, and from other countries are crucially important to help Ukraine's survival. But the more I looked into how new technologies are used in this war, the more I realized the growing role of private, initially civilian companies. These companies are providing goods and services, not because their government told them, but because they wanted to, for political or for business reasons, of course. And most importantly, in my view, these companies are providing goods and services that governments and militaries, and in many cases not even the US military, have. So of the roughly 10,000 satellites or so that orbit around the planet, about half of them now belong to SpaceX. Yeah. This is low Earth orbit. There are other orbits where there are no SpaceX satellites, but still, of the 10,000, it's half that belong to SpaceX. Soon it will be thousands more. And even the few satellites that, for example, the Pentagon has itself, they are being put into orbit by SpaceX rockets. No one other can offer satellite-based internet connectivity like SpaceX. And of the hundreds of thousands of drones in Ukraine, as I said, a significant portion is produced by DJI and a few other civilian drone manufacturers. These aren't necessarily even the best systems for Ukraine to use, but no state can churn out comparable numbers of drones, especially at these prices. And in the cyber realm, well, the private sector basically owns the place. The US military may have had an important role in the beginning of the internet, but its elements, its infrastructure, its architecture is made up of private companies. The DoD has its own cloud, but it runs on Amazon servers. Most Western countries might now have branches in their military, cyber branches in their military, but they don't come near the capabilities of Google or Microsoft. And I'm convinced that this phenomenon is only going to grow in the future. One of the developments I'm particularly interested in is exactly what Shashank just described, the way that the advertising technology ecosystem, i.e. surveillance capitalism, is being used for surveillance and reconnaissance by the military and intelligence community. And as Byron Tao, who has done really great work on this, notes, the advertising technology ecosystem is the largest information gathering enterprise ever conceived by man, and it wasn't built by the government. So, to lay it out there, we are increasingly living in a world in which not only the most important technological breakthroughs are happening in the private sector, think ChatGPT, but one in which capabilities immediately needed for war are in the hands of the private sector. What is the primary, I would argue, responsibility of the state to keep its citizens secure is now increasingly dependent on goods and services that only companies have. And while these companies are, of course, founded and headquartered somewhere, they increasingly see themselves as international, not linked or indeed responsible to one single state. States are increasingly waking up to this development. Many are uneasy about it, but only few have really begun to do something about it. One example is Taiwan. In October 2023, the Taiwanese president pledged $1.3 billion to develop a satellite internet network entirely made and controlled from Taiwan. Taiwan is building an alternative to Starlink. And the reasons should be somewhat obvious. I mean, Taiwan saw in Ukraine the importance of a reliable internet connection during war. And as we're all aware, Taiwan, unfortunately, has to prepare for the possibility of a Chinese invasion in the coming decade. But relying on Starlink is less obvious for Taiwan than it might be for Ukraine or indeed the US. Because Elon Musk, who has been so personally involved, remember the tweets, in providing Ukraine with internet connectivity to fight against Russia, might see a confrontation between China and Taiwan differently. In the past, Musk made comments endorsing the Chinese Communist Party's stance on Taiwan. And more importantly, Tesla, Musk's other firm, is highly dependent on the Chinese market, which is its largest market outside the United States and home to one of Tesla's largest gigafactories. What if we relied on Starlink and Musk decided to cut down because of pressures from China because he has China's market at stake, a Taiwanese think tanker told the New York Times. And this isn't a theoretical consideration, because also the New York Times revealed in July 2023 that the Ukrainian armed forces, at several instances, had to change their operations because of Musk's decision of when and where internet connectivity via Starlink was available. Namely, Elon Musk personally decided that Starlink could not cover Crimea, making an attack there difficult to impossible. Hence, private companies have their own interests. It might be their bottom line, it could be political views of their board or CEO. Who are these companies loyal to? In the blog post in which he described Microsoft's effort in Ukraine, Microsoft's president Brad Smith noted, "It is important to note that we are a company and not a government or a country." And in his recent book, he wrote, "Governments serve constituents who live in a defined geography, such as a state or nation. But tech has gone global, and we have customers virtually everywhere." So loyalties are unclear. So we are seeing new dependencies, new vulnerabilities for states. The challenge for states, this is obviously a challenge for states, which no longer can kind of guide developments as it used to. But this is also, and this is my final point, a challenge for the private companies. Because firms should be preparing for the possibility that their products and services may be used in future conflicts. Russia's aggression and the very obvious violation of international law left little need for debate as to which side to support. But in future confrontations, things may not be so clear-cut, especially if there are commercial interests on both sides. Furthermore, private companies need to prepare for their products or potentially even their staff becoming targets in future conflicts. The cyber attack on Viasat made that point. And then finally, firms may not actually be able to control who uses their product and for what purposes. DJI, the drone company I just mentioned, they actually suspended operations in both Russia and Ukraine 2 weeks into the war. And yet thousands and thousands of their drones are being used on both sides in the war, their operating systems jailbroken to change the location data it broadcasts. I want to end with some reflections and indeed questions for you. Because I'm not a historian, and I feel that we need to think through historical precedents of all of this. Because, of course, this isn't the first time that private companies have had a lot of power in international politics, and it's not the first time that they did relevant things in military conflicts. I mean, from the East India Company to the firms that laid the telegraph cables that we heard this morning described by Ian, private entrepreneurs have always played a role. But my hunch is that there are still elements here that are genuinely new. Most strikingly, in my view, is the fact that companies are decreasingly tethered to one state. So to repeat Brad Smith, governments serve constituents who live in a defined geography, such as a state or nation. But tech has gone global, and we have customers virtually everywhere. So, how new is this? Are there historical precedents for this? And how has it in the past been worked out if companies were more powerful than the state? Thank you very much.
Do you think we'll see other nations follow Taiwan's example?
Yes, I think so. I mean, not necessarily with the satellites. Also, by the way, we couldn't. There's already a concern that SpaceX is basically crowding low Earth orbit. Okay. There's not much space left. So if every other country were to put up satellites, that wouldn't work. But on most of these issues, I see also in my discussions on the European continent that there are efforts to kind of try to build own clouds, indeed think about satellite connectivity, these things. So I think there's a movement towards that. I'm not sure whether that is actually the best solution. I'm not saying we should kind of renationalize all of this and states should just be doing this themselves. You can, of course, work with the private sector. But I think we have entered a kind of new territory here. And so the relationship between the state and these international private companies will have to change.
Okay.